you want to start us off by telling us your name, your degree, and your year?
Yes, I'm Decheng. Some people also call me Clement. I'm doing fourth year law and international and global studies.
And what slogan and colours are you running on for USU?
I'm running orange, which is a color of senior uni as well. So, and my slogan is fairer uni for all.
Cool. Why would you say you're running for the USU this year?
Because I think it's time, to have a change. The first thing is there are policies they are going on, but they need to be fulfilled for long term, and some of the directors are going to be retired. Second, I have some own idea to fight for the equality for everyone. As I said in my slogan, it's a fairer union for all, not for a particular group.
So when you say a fairer union for all, how do you imagine that it will become fairer?
Yeah, fairer means some people would concept it as a equality, but I think it's more about equal opportunity and the equal access to the resources of the union and all the resources, and the union should be helping everyone to access the resources around the university. I said it's a fairer uni for all, which means university, not the union.
So what students do you think are being left behind right now?
First is disabled students, for whom I'm advocating for. Second, international students and students in poverty, and other minorities such as Aboriginal students and some students from color background, as well as some students in other particular difficulties.
So what's a way the union can help these students gain a fairer experience of university?
So I stated in my policy, but the first one appeared during my nomination is not a comprehensive one. The first thing I said is to have a charity. I'm going to donate my salary, but it's not I think it should not be a harsh thing to other directors. So it's my volunteer will, and I also want people to join that movement to have a fund regulated by students. And second, I'm running for the employment opportunity. As we know that in Australia there are a lot of employment discrimination existing, and the first thing I'm concerning about is some manifesting discrimination against international students. If you go to the career center, you'll see that Australian citizens only, which is very rude, I think. And I know that the capacity of the union is not as much as we can change everything. But as I know that the union has a lot of cooperation with commercial companies, and they use our festival resources, they use our O-Week resources. If they have discriminatory policy against any particular group, including women, international students, colored people, we'll say no to them.
So hang on, that policy sounds like it's just going to lose the union a lot of money, right? So these big companies aren't it's not as though the union's doing them a massive favour by bringing them onto campus. They usually have budgets far bigger than the union's budget. They can easily find partnerships elsewhere. It's the union that's going to struggle under that model. So how are you going to make up for the presumably huge amounts of money that get lost if major companies don't want to change their hiring practices?
Good point. The first thing is that we have to do this smartly. As I know that some companies are regulated by the law or the government policy that they have to hire some particular people. That's one thing. But what we want to say is that we may lose money because they don't go into the campus anymore. But if everyone just sacrifice our political rightness and give up our rights, and then what we can get is zero. So the first thing is that people should be treated equally. Like if there's a discriminatory policy which make money for the union, then the money is dirty. right?
What
So-
can you name a discriminatory policy that you're referring to that you would want to get rid of?
The employment, which is the employment policy rejecting particular groups. And if you go to the career center, or if you, because I'm personally international students, I apply for a lot of interns. They say yes, you meet all of our requirement, but sorry, because you are not Australian permanent resident, and because you are what, and perhaps they can reject people like pregnant women, and those kind of policies are discriminatory.
But how many of these companies does the union actually have a partnership with?
As far as I know, if you go to the OWIC, you'll see Commonwealth Bank right there, right? And Macquarie Bank, they are there, they have that policy. So what we are going to do is that we are going to do that smartly. We're not going to say, okay, sorry, no, you are not going to the campus tomorrow, but we are going to urge them to change. It's a kind of political stuff, but it takes a while, I understand.
So do you think the union then has a role to play in political advocacy?
Yes.
So how would you go about doing that? Would you limit that political advocacy to things that the union can do on campus, or would you stand up for protest actions as well, for public demonstrations? Where's the limit on the union's political role?
It depends on the capacity of the union, right? Because the union is not the Commonwealth government of Australia. It's different. We have different kind of power. To the best of our capability, what we can do. Instead of because elected board directors must be responsible to the union. So we have to think about the interest of the union. But the union is responsible for the students in our uni. So that is what I'm thinking.
So when you say you clearly have, political ideas and ideas that you want to implement, but for example, have you been involved in other campaigns of political advocacy? For example, the SRC's push for international students to have concession cards. Have you been involved in that?
Yes. Many of my friends are counselors in the SRC, and I'm making friends with other members in the SRC. What I'm thinking is that if the regulation allows, we should fund some campaigns, because as far as I know, SRC is not allowed to get fund from some private sectors, from some companies. They are not allowed, but they might be allowed to get money from the union, and we may have the money to our best of our capacity. And yeah, exactly. And
so you give money to the SRC directly?
It depends on the conditions, but yes, generally. What I also did a video myself, introducing how this kind of thing may happen, and we are actively negotiating and connecting with MPs and other sectors to achieve that goal.
What other campaigns have you been involved in other than the concession card campaign?
I don't think. Okay, another campaign I think I get involved is that, as you may know, that I run a Chinese language public platform called NUNC, N-U-N-C, and if you read that, you will know that I'm supporting the strike of teachers, and I'm reporting that actively, and I'm also reporting homeless people, and I think that's my best capacity, that I can help disadvantaged groups.
So what you're saying is you're standing up for an overtly political union. The union's role on campus, in most students' eyes, is as a service provider, and that's most people's daily interaction with it. You risk alienating a lot of students who don't share the same political views as you if you say get out and support strikes, which there's a probably quite reasonable argument to be made. A lot of students on campus might not support. How do you think it's justifiable to risk alienating those students?
What you ask is very interesting. Okay, let me explain it to you. For example, the election of the USU, they have a list of regulations which includes that candidates cannot be, for example, discriminatory, homophobic, or etc. And I think it is also a part of the political element of the union. So what I'm thinking is that, of course, we are going to make the management going smoothly and try to make smart money and spend that money on the benefit of students. That's why we have an election. That's why we are different from a commercial company. Perhaps they have a better economical scale, but why we run this kind of stuff? Why is the union providing services?
But it depends on whose eyes then you define benefit to students. Is it just your view of what's beneficial to students? Given that there are so many different students who interact with the USU on a daily basis, and many of them have different views about whether the USU should go on strike or about whether the USU should support the SRC in different political campaigns, how are you going to navigate between those different views?
Of course, people have the liberty to express their views when they vote, right? If they do not agree, I respect the thing. Of course, I'm not going to only focus on the political factor, but what I'm going to do is to try my best.
But there's a big difference between saying, well, people can express their political views at a ballot box, when a lot of people approach the USU elections as approaching a service provider. They expect to be given access to clubs and societies, to be given access to food on campus. If you then halfway through your term come out with a suite of policies that say, I'm going to support the SRC, we're going to have strikes, we're going to protest down George Street, don't you risk a lot of students then feeling that they can't interact with their union?
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Okay, let me answer. Because you didn't let me outline all of my policies so far. I also have other policies focusing on the services.
Well, that's fine, but it doesn't matter whether you have other policies focusing on services. But my question is, if you do have political policies, aren't those political policies themselves a big risk in terms of students' engagement with the USU?
Okay. So what you are saying is that if we spend money on political campaigns, which is a sacrifice for the interest of some students, they would not agree with the campaigns. Is that right?
A sacrifice of their interest, and something which I think, if it doesn't align with their political views, is deeply alienating. If somebody is right-wing or believes, say, that strikes shouldn't happen, and then you go on strike, then that person could very well find it difficult to be a continuing member of the Clubs and Societies program, or feel like their USU can serve them independently, even though they've paid their access fee.
Okay. If they are right-wing, I respect them, of course. I respect everyone. But if they think they are right-wing and they are losing because of what I'm advocating, they can choose their candidate to fight against me, right? It's a kind of versus. Like, I'm not going to say I'm dominating everything. I have to go through the regulations and the rules of the union. So that is not only on me, but what on me is what I'm advocating for.
But couldn't you just avoid all this together by leaving the advocacy to the SRC and saying the USU is here to provide sound services on campus and good financial management? Isn't that going to result in a lot less controversy and a USU that actually serves its members?
Okay, I got that from SRC, the idea from my friend in SRC. I understand what they are experiencing is that they lack the financial support.
So why do you want to run for USU and not SRC?
Because the SRC cannot get the money. Okay.
So
they have different functions, of course.
Yeah.
They have different functions. What I'm going to do is that, for example, SRC is not running for the festivals and the O week on campus, right? But what I'm thinking is that I can do something change on this sector. So they are different. It's not about why I'm running for this one and I'm not running for that one. I'm running for a possible way to achieve my goals.
So you would be happier with, for example, a smaller OEIC with less corporations, as long as they all accepted international students into their workplaces? Is that what?
There are many companies who are not that kind of arrogant to particular groups. There are many companies are happy to get involved because Sydney University is one of the most prestigious university in Australia. So I think there will be other people, there will be other alternatives for us to choose. And for example, in the United States, it's not allowed to have such a kind of policy against any person, like because of their particular feature, like they are international, they are not PR, they are women, they are disabled.
Well, it's also not legal in Australia either under the Discrimination Act. There are certain regulations that.
But they manifest.
There are certain regulations that say
yeah.
companies can't hire non-citizens for certain positions.
And that is the same in the United States as well. They have.
In Australia, if you go to the Student Career Centre, you will see that.
So you're saying that if I go to the Students Career Centre, I will see jobs advertised that say no women, no pregnant people,
no
people
international,
over a certain age.
no international
students, but because of their visa status.
It's not like that. I can tell you many long stories about that, but what I'm also saying is that, of course, they are not manifesting we are against women, we are against minorities, but if we find out but if we find out that if we can find out that is the same in my policy, that because it's a fair union for all, not for international students, for domestic students, for women, for a particular group.
But with respect, many international students are here on visas that prohibit them from working. There are study visas that restrict international students to a certain number of hours per work. There are different classes of visas. And my understanding is, I'm no expert on this, but under those visa schemes, companies are sometimes under an obligation only to employ Australian citizens or permanent residents. Okay. So are you advocating those companies breach the law?
If you study that law, because I'm particularly interested in that area, if a student graduates from the University of Sydney and he or she had 2 years of education in Australia, he is allowed to be granted a working visa, which allows him or her to work for unlimited hours for 2 years. And if he gets experience during that 2 years, he can get a permanent visa afterwards. But many graduate positions in the University of Sydney, the international students can absolutely fill those positions, not because of the limits, just because their discriminatory attitude. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Going back to so you mentioned before that you want to create a charity with your salary. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what will this charity do? Because I don't think this was in your policy statement.
But that is a paraphrase of my first policy about my making those kind of positions into voluntary jobs. But we thought that because it might be difficult for some other elected positions to be financially easy. So what I'm saying that is to get that goal, we can have various ways to achieve that. So the charity should be democratically administrated by students.
Okay.
And that's what I'm saying, because you can see a lot of charities on street. If you go from Redfern Station and then you go to ABS, right? You meet them, right? Sure. I also donate $25.
But what's this charity's function? Is it for students? What will it give students?
Yeah, they are not for students.
But your charity, the charity.
My charity, it depends on what is the democratic resolution. Is that like
Who's democratic resolution?
What I'm saying is that personally, my view is that we should give that to disadvantaged students.
So do you want, for example, this charity to pay for disadvantaged students' school fees, like pay for their university fees? Or pay for their access cards? What do you want this charity to give back?
It depends on their needs. But for example, I have a very good friend. He is very severely disabled. He has to stay on his wheelchair, but what I'm saying is that he experienced a lot of difficult life, and the charity and what he said to me is that the access facilities at the uni, some of them are not that functional, and they also experience a lot of difficulties. For example, they have to spend more money than other students because they need their wheelchairs, right? Okay. So, yeah, for example, that can be a part of the aim of the charity.
So do you want to use the charity to give money to these students or to build ramps on campus? Because there's a big difference.
Yeah. Of course, in case of the need, but I think directly to students.
So give them grants if they
for particular use, Yeah.
So you said it would be democratically decided what the direction of this charity is.
Yes.
How do you see that working? Is there going to be an election of charity officials? Will there be a charities election? What's the plan?
So the thing will be, as the charity will be governed by the USU, as it's funded by USU. So I think the elected positions in the USU, they should have a say,
so the board directors.
Yeah, board directors.
On the policy point you have related to this about sacrificing your salary, you're probably, if you do that, and if you're elected, to our knowledge, you'll be the first board director to sacrifice their salary in recent times. Aren't you setting a very bad precedent? Because even if you don't force other board candidates or encourage other board directors to sacrifice their salaries, then suddenly there's a new level where you say, well, to be an upstanding board director, you need to sacrifice your salary. That probably looks good to a certain amount of the student population. And then in future years, if candidates run on platforms other than sacrificing their salary, they won't get votes. So doesn't that disenfranchise poor students or students of low SES background?
Okay. That's why I paraphrased my statement about donating my salary to establishing a fund. That is different, because if I establish a fund and I donate my stuff, it's because I want to support my policy to the best of my capacity. It's not to urge other people to do the same thing, because it's not an obligation. You said that some voters may not vote for the candidates who are not going to give up their salaries, but I would not agree, because people are in different circumstances.
Speaking very generally then about your position, how would you describe your political views in your own words?
In short, I would say that cosmopolitanism and left wing.
What do you mean by cosmopolitanism?
Cosmopolitanism is embracing everyone to the community, especially in Australia. Like, you are white, are you Asian? Like, we should be able to, because the society is very developed in Australia already. So what we are going to do is to make it fairer. It's fair enough, advanced Australian fair, but we are going to make it fairer as a very tiny part of the society.
All right.
Just to follow up on that, so two values, cosmopolitanism, left wing. Board directors have certain duties to the board. I think you touched on a couple of them earlier. If a decision you had to make as a board director, or if one of your duties required you to do something which you felt went against those two values, would you breach your duty to the board if you thought your duty was forcing you to do something right wing or something that was not cosmopolitan?
Okay, that is about I think it's part of the legal stuff, because I also signed the statutory declaration before my nomination. And what I would say is that I will do my duty. I will follow my obligation because I will respect other people's different views. and I want other people to respect my policies.
So let's talk about a little bit about your experience
Yeah.
with the union. So your involvement in your resume in the USU website says you're a member of quite a few societies. So why haven't you been more involved in the union if you're running for union board?
Okay, I get your idea. You are saying that because I'm not that connected to the union, but I'm running for the union board after.
Well, if you are connected, tell us how you are.
Okay. I'll say that I'm not that connected. Okay, to be very honest. But I'm a fourth year student. I see a lot of things. I'm not saying I'm more experienced, but what I'm doing there is I observe. I think the position as an observer is also very important, because if you are getting to that, you may not have the comprehensive understanding to that point, because you are limited. It doesn't give you more understanding to something. I think does
it give you any understanding to be on the outside?
It's not too bad, because for example, if I'm running for an election campaign, I should stand on the point of the voters rather than the campaigners, right?
Okay, so even if you're not a campaigner in previous elections, so you've observed for 4 years, what's the harm in spending this year to run for some society executive positions, to have some leadership roles within the union, so you have more exposure to how to lead students, and then run for union board later, or maybe doing that last year?
Okay. We all went to the exchange during my second year, right? And that year I couldn't do that job, right? In my first year I cannot do that job because I'm going to study overseas. And in my third year I just transferred into law. I was extremely busy personally, and that is now that is the only chance that I can go for it. That's why.
Okay, but there have been previous law students who have gone on exchange, who have run for union board, and who have been, more involved in the union beyond just signing up to societies and going to events.
Okay, it's a very hard question, I understand, but what I'm saying that as long as I'm qualified, and then I think about my ideas about those policies, employment, about the things, and have a more entertaining union or whatever. I think for a long while, and when I think my idea is relatively mature, I go for it, and I'm qualified. I'm lucky. So that's
the thing. You seem to have a lot of ideas, but actually being on board doesn't necessarily involve you coming up with brilliant strokes of policy. It involves you looking through detailed financial reports, managing tens of different staff members, ensuring that you can negotiate effectively as a team, trying to implement your policy platform and the other candidates' policy platforms, but at the same time providing effective leadership and scrutiny of a $28 million organization's direction. So do you think you're qualified really to do that, given you've been a member of a couple of societies?
About the leadership, I didn't write it down on my resume, but when I was 18 years old, I was awarded as a group champion of Chinese national leadership competition for secondary students. What I was running is I get a campaign for helping people in extreme poverty in my province, and what I did was I established a preschool for them, for minority students who cannot speak Mandarin Chinese, and to build wheels from and I gained funds from the provincial government. I think that's a part of the negotiating skill you said about. I saw the vice governor, and then we settled it down. I helped people to improve their life, and it was reported by the television. So I think that can be evidence of my leadership.
So what do you personally love about the union?
Okay, I think what is interesting for the union is that it's two sides. One side is that it's a service provider. It's a kind of business. The second side is that it is elected by students, and they might do something like have the capacity to run together. Like the SRC, they only have one side, but they don't have the other side. I'm not criticizing because they have different focuses, but that is what it is different.
Okay, but what do you prefer this, like, what do you find most engaging for you with the union?
Okay. I love the O week. That's a really good thing. I feel the O week of the university is one of the best in Australia. I also went to some of the other universities. I visited them, and yeah, especially the variety of societies. Like people have different views, but they can still stick together to have jobs. Yeah, it's a kind of cosmopolitanism, I think.
Which society or club on campus would you say is your favourite?
It's hard to say, but yeah, because I have friends in every sector, so I may not be able to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I ask you what is the best university in Australia, it would be very hard.
University of Sydney.
Sydney. Yeah.
Let's have a think about a couple of the USU's policies of recent times.
Yep.
So you might have heard of the changed regulations surrounding alcohol funding for clubs and society events. Do you support that policy?
To reduce the alcohol funding?
So now currently, clubs and societies can only obtain alcohol funding for events that they hold at USU licensed venues. So if they hold an event at a bar somewhere off campus, they can't get any funding for the alcohol that they buy.
I would agree.
You'd agree?
I would agree, because alcohol, I'm a law student, I study in many criminal cases, and I find that the alcohol without control is very dangerous. And it is not say that they are out of control, but we should try to be responsible to students. The union should be responsible to students. That's what I'm saying.
So one of the criticisms of that policy hasn't so much been the substance of the policy, but that it was introduced with very little consultation with clubs and societies. Do you think that there should have been more consultation?
They can have their views. They can talk with the board directors. They can try to persuade them, but it's up to them. But it's different. Like we put the regulation, and you may protest, but it's still going through the process. So if it goes through the process and the consultation is done, it's very hard to define how much consultation should be done. So,
well, here clubs and societies executives say there was very little, but then the view that comes back from the current board is that this is a very important policy and it improves the safety of students, like you just said. And so it was justifiable to implement this policy without widely consulting clubs and societies. Do you agree with that? I mean, if a policy seems important to you, would you implement it without actually consulting the stakeholders?
I will consult. I will listen. I think I'm a listener as well, but I may not change my mind.
So what's the point of consulting?
Consulting is that I listen to you, I think that, and I still make my choice, unless you can persuade me, convince me actually.
But you just said you wouldn't change your mind.
I wouldn't change my mind.
On this policy or?
On this policy.
Right.
Okay.
But that's a foregone conclusion. You haven't listened to any clubs and societies give you the contrary view, I presume.
Yeah.
It's tricky. Okay, I said after consultation, I will not change my mind. I may not change my mind. Okay, I may not change my mind unless there is a very convincing argument against my mind. I'm open for any kind of opinion. I think that is a character of a democracy, of the spirit of Australia, this country. But still,
on another policy recently, do you support the board's affirmative action policy?
Feminism policy?
Yeah, it's affirmative action policy which says that a certain number of people who don't identify as cisgender men have to be elected every year.
Oh, the AA policy.
Yeah.
Okay. If the result of the election is significantly against women, in some instances, I think it will be necessary. but okay, I'll say yes. Generally, yes, because it protects women.
Generally, yes, but
Generally, yes.
Other exceptions.
For example, if there are some accidentally there are some women identifying candidates, they are very, very unrepresentative. I mean, they get very little votes.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the support from the people. I don't think they should be in the board. You know what I mean?
What's the threshold? What counts as a small number of votes?
I would consider, but it should be proportionate to be capable to represent the students. I think if you ask me the question, I cannot give you the answer now, because I think it would be irresponsible if I just have a number 100, 2,000. It's not responsible.
But you can't really have an affirmative action policy if there's, if
It's a math stuff.
There's a quota.
Yeah.
It's a quota, yeah.
But
like
the whole point of an affirmative action policy is that sometimes, because of systematic oppression, women or minority identifying candidates just can't achieve the same number of votes as men or those who have power. So aren't you effectively saying you don't support affirmative action?
I said I support it, unless the votes is very inappropriate. Unless it's very little, I mean, okay, 99%, I support the AA policy.
What about AA for international students?
I would not agree.
Okay.
Why is that?
Okay. I think last year one candidate has a policy, so that's why you asked me. But I would not agree, because I think the election should be, because the disadvantage of international students in that election is still to be debated, like to what extent they are disadvantaged, right? But women and minority groups, they are significantly disadvantaged.
So would you have a quota for people of colour then, if not international students?
People of color? No.
No.
Because as a university, the demographic statistic result is very different from the whole country, right?
Another couple of questions on this year's campaign. Out of the field of candidates, who are your top 3 picks?
You ask that question every year. Okay. Top 3? I must have 3? Okay. I think the first one should be Maya. I do some of my policy cooperation with her together. You will see that later. The second one might be Molly, Zimeng.
Oh, Zimeng, right.
Zimeng, yeah. Okay. I don't have my.
Not a problem.
Okay, that's all right.
And in terms of the flip side, who would you not be able to work with out of this year's candidates?
So to whom I most detest? Okay, that is a question. I don't want to target on any candidate because I respect them.
Fair enough. One more question then. If you do get elected, who will you support in the upcoming presidential elections for board?
Perhaps Lily.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But it's
not concrete.
It's not promised.
You don't have to vote based on what you say now. Alright, so should we go to some of your policies?
Yes.
One policy which you have is about programs helping international and domestic students with more interns at the USU.
Yeah.
How would you envision this working? Are these going to be unpaid internships?
The concept I come up with is that the USU has a lot of business cooperation with commercial companies. For example, as you know, Qingdao Beer or some other companies, if they are going to cooperate with us, you may have to give our students job to what extent you need. Like you don't only pay money, you give our students interns or jobs. For that, about the if it's paid or not, I think it's to be negotiated. Because of course we want our schoolmates to be paid, but it depends on the capacity of the commercial company. If they can provide more opportunity, I'm happy to say it's not that necessary to be paid because experience is more important.
So on the one hand, you say that you support unpaid internships, yet one of your other policies is that you want to combat underpaying employees who are students. Isn't there an ideological tension there?
I don't think there is, because it's two things. First, some students are seeking for experience and they do not care about their wage. For example, the internship program of the United Nations in New York, they do not pay intern things. But on the other hand, some students are working in very bad working conditions. Like there are some Asian restaurants, they only pay $8 to $12 to students, and it's a very common practice. And I have many friends getting engaged into this kind of difficulties. So it's two different scenarios. As long as we give students what they want, I think that is good.
But surely the two things go hand in hand. So on the one hand, continuing to support the practice of unpaid internships, even if they're at top companies or like the UN, might look really nice and great on a CV, and students might think they want that. But if you allow that practice to continue, doesn't that just promote a culture where employers feel like they can treat their employees with impunity? And so from there, that trickles down, perhaps one could argue, into the practices of like smaller business owners who might pay well below the minimum wage. So don't you think that you actually saying that you're left-wing and cosmopolitan should instead combat both?
Of course, I suppose the welfare of students, I think internships should be paid. But we have to do things step by step. The first step is that because it's a legal context, if they are underpaid, they are paid $8 in a restaurant, it's illegal. But if they do voluntary jobs as an intern, it's legally allowed. So what we are going to do, the first step is to protect the legal right of students. And second, we implement the ideology that interns should be paid, so it doesn't conflict each other.
So are you offering these internships to all USU students or only Access Card members?
All uni students.
So then what's the stake that the union has? Because the union serves the Access Card holders.
Yes.
And if you open these internship opportunities to all students, that's what that's what USU does. The Faculty of Arts and Sciences has its own partnerships with companies that it offers internships to all students.
Okay, the question is good. We primarily get money from access fee, but we are still in very tight connection to all students in the University of Sydney. For example, we provide services or we provide entertainment, this kind of thing. Even some commercial companies, they still try to fight for the right of their customers, right? So it doesn't conflict the thing. And I think the welfare of all students are a part of the interest of Access members.
So when you said before that some of your friends are underpaid by the restaurants that they're employed by, how is the union going to help them fight to be paid fairly and legally?
Yes. Restaurants is a part and other small business. If we find out that the suppliers of, for example, the suppliers of food court regulated by the USU, they are going to have that kind of capitalist exploitation against the students, we are not going to cooperate with them. And of course, it is impractical to just say no to them, but we will try our best to amend the contract, to get guarantee, to get promise from them, and yeah.
So which suppliers are you talking about? Are you talking about the actual restaurant outlets in the food court, or do you mean the companies that give those restaurant outlets the ingredients that they use? For instance?
Both of them.
So the restaurant outlets themselves operate under the USU. They are the USU, and the contract is negotiated with them.
Yeah.
So presumably they're already paying a fair wage.
True. But we keep our eye on them. The thing is, like, we try to make it as wide as possible to the best of capacity. And for example, their suppliers, the people who are doing the deliver vegetables to them, those kind of beverage providers, and we are not police. We are not going to police them, but we can keep our eye down on them, like, if we receive any complaints.
But what can the USU meaningfully do here? I mean, it can secure guarantees in contracts with suppliers, right? But normally these kinds of practices that you're talking about happen under the table anyway. It's not something that employers realize it's illegal, right? So they might say one thing on a contract but then continue to exploit students. How are you actually going to use the resources of the USU to make a change?
Of course. What you said is right. And there are some commercial companies, for example, they refuse to use the products of animal cruelty, and that is their political opinion, and we are going to apply that to, because the legal right of those kind of illegal practices, their obligation is to the government, to the law, but they are going to make promise to us as well. I think it doesn't conflict each other.
Moving on, some of your other policies statements were quite vague. For example, you said you wanted to endeavour to increase affordability of campus services.
Yes.
And then don't really provide any examples of what you plan to implement.
Because there's a word limit of 200. The thing I'm going to do is to have an affordability review by students and by the board to investigate if they are significantly more expensive than the outside. Because if the service is provided by the union is more expensive than the outside, the union's meaning, we cannot reflect the meaning that we serve the students. We are just exploding. So yeah, that's what I think.
What food outlets on campus are more expensive, do you think? Can you name specific places on campus that you think are expensive?
I can, but I would not, because I need more investigation and consideration into this kind of stuff if get elected.
So how do you know that there is a problem to begin with? If you haven't investigated?
I feel that.
You feel it, but
personally, and my
have you price compared?
My classmates complained that to me, and they said the food quality is not as high, but the price is higher than the outside. I think if you ask me now, any answer by me personally is irresponsible, because I need the number, I need the data, and to give the correct answer.
Okay, so presuming the data bears out what you think is going on, how are you actually going to firstly reduce the price, but at the same time improve the quality, since those are the two problems you've identified?
Yeah. So there are businesses, contractors in our food court, right? And they have a lot of customers because they are located in the center of the university. And then if we publish the affordability review of them, the student will know that, and it's kind of political, but we'll try our best to let them know who is more expensive and who should be blamed for the expensive living costs as a uni.
So you would want to publish this affordability review and get students to stop eating at some USU outlets if you think they're too expensive.
So you're trying to boycott your own outlets, effectively.
It's different.
Is it?
How?
It's different. Okay. Okay. Give me.
Yeah.
To boycott, it doesn't sound good. If they can improve, we have no reason to boycott them. So if you say we boycott someone, it's like we intentionally target
But
on
isn't that
someone.
what you just said that you get students to do? To not go and eat at outlets that they know are more expensive? I mean, you
They
said
will
it doesn't
voluntarily
sound
do
good, but
that.
that's what it is. It's boycotting.
Or in a new period of year, like we are going to make new contracts, we are going to review that kind of stuff and determine whether or not we are going to continue that contract.
Okay, so what if then in a year, right, you come back, firstly, you've had boycotts and stores, outlets on campus have stopped making as much money as they think they will. Do you think they'll be in any position to then renegotiate a contract which puts more financial burden on them to firstly lower prices and improve quality? How can a business do that at the same time and remain profitable?
If you ask me now, because they are private companies, they are private sectors, I cannot read their financial report and tell you, but I believe, okay, my basis is that because they have plenty of customers, very crowded food court, they see a lot of things, but it's still more expensive. That is my assumption that the business is profitable. And next time we negotiate with them, we'll review that and adjust our terms of our contract in the future.
What if the result of all of this is that you just shoot the USU in the foot and you don't make as much profit as you are currently? So if you force businesses to improve their food and reduce their prices, they stop being able to pay as much rent, or at the same time you get students to boycott those outlets and their takings reduce, which means again the rent that flows into the USU and the cut of the profits that flows into the USU is reduced. Then what happens if you reduce the USU's bottom line? Will you take responsibility for that?
Of course, we are going to do that smartly. I think it's a long-term strategy, and making money is never such a bad thing as long as the money is spent on the right things.
But if you don't have the money in the first place?
We have money in the first place.
Well, with respect, the USU is operating on a deficit at the moment, so you currently don't have balanced budget books. This policy looks like it's just going to cut revenue more, so how are you going to ensure the USU stays afloat?
For example, I'm not sure how those contracts are made among competition, because I believe that many small businesses want to get into our food court, right? Or our facilities, because we have a lot of students, we have plenty of customers. And then I don't think how the procedure, how they get into the food court is very transparent. In the government, in the common practice of government, they have a fair competition among small businesses and those contractors, and we choose the one we think that is good.
What do you have to suggest the USU doesn't operate a competitive tender?
We operate, but we cannot see the record of it on any part, right? We can only see the annual report.
Okay, let's ask about that then, because the USU, as a major financial organisation, does have confidential matters. Part of its board meetings are in camera, which means that the public can't observe.
Yeah.
So, do you think that practice should cease? Should students be able to see all decisions that the board makes in the full detail?
As long as the confidentiality doesn't, as the sacrifice of confidentiality doesn't significantly impair the operation of the union. I believe in transparency. And because USU, it's very special position. It's not just a commercial company. It should be responsible for all the students as a uni. So I think they should be able to know.
So other than these contracts, what else do you think should be more transparent from the union?
What I can see on the website of the union is the annual report and the minute of the board. But more detailed record of how money is spent is insufficient. Yeah.
And then you also stated in your policy that you wanted to decrease access membership fee by optimizing financial management. What do you mean by this?
Okay. I understand it's a large amount of money and it's vital for the union. So of course, I'm not going to cut it in the first hand and let the union to be enabled to operate. What I'm saying is that first we can have a pay month by month scheme. It is also a kind of cut because it's more affordable to students and it doesn't decrease the total amount of revenue of the union. So it is one way. Yeah.
So does that mean you'd use something like a couple of the other candidates are proposing Afterpay?
Yep.
Right.
So would it be fair to say that you have, since submitting the policy document, you've rethought some of your policies?
What did
Because why wouldn't it be simpler for you have just written on your policy document that you wanted to introduce Afterpay or month-by-month payments, rather than saying you want to decrease the membership fee? Because it seems like
a little bit different.
Yeah. So have you rethought some of your policies?
What I rethought is, of course, I mentioned the first one. I'm going to put a fund instead of making voluntary jobs. That would be very hard. And what I also added some policies I couldn't write it on the thing, is that the USU should provide more convenience to students. One example is a charging station. Okay. The students always find difficult to charge their phones at the uni. If you go to Fisher Library, the cables are very limited. But when I was studying in King's College London, in the library, they got a very large charge station with lockers. People can lock their phone inside and charge their phone and to make it secure.
How realistic is this? The USU doesn't own any of the libraries on campus.
Yeah. What I said is not in the library, but in our properties. For example, Wentworth Building.
Is that really going to be that convenient for students, given that there aren't study spaces in Wentworth or in Manning?
Excuse me?
There aren't study spaces in the Wentworth building or in Manning or in the home building. So students probably they might spend lunch there, but I'm not sure whether the bulk of charging needs, which makes sense to fall in the library, are really in those places.
But they can charge there for 1 hour or half an hour, because it's like a kind of lifesaver for them. Especially students are very dependent on those kind of smart devices. And if they can do that and they go to lecture, keep their phones out, and when they come back to Wentworth Building, they get their phone and they buy a coffee. It's also good for the revenue of the USU.
Can you tell us which two of your 10 or so policies are the most important to you?
Okay. The first most important to me is about the employability of international students and other minorities, other disadvantaged groups. And the second is the Opal Card campaign. I'm going to support that to my best ability.
Okay.
And the third is convenience stuff to provide charging and other, I think umbrella, if practical, we can also do that. I'm not pretty sure yet because we still need to review the cost and pros and cons of those kind of policies.
Especially because the USU sells umbrellas for $40.
Yeah. We can rent them, right?
Just a couple of questions about one more policy. So one of your policies is that the USU will actively help students to get affordable accommodation.
Yes.
How do you see the USU doing that?
Yeah. What we can see now is that we have some apps such as Flatmate. You can use that on your phone. But I feel that many of my friends, many of my peers, they love to live together with senior uni students. So it's a kind of, I'm not going to provide the accommodation, but to help them to find the accommodation, especially if they come from other states or even other countries. They are alone. They are they are longing for someone to live with them and get affordable accommodation together, because accommodation on campus is very limited. Even the Queen Mary building is still very expensive.
So how is this going to happen practically? Do you want to design an app? Is it going to be
design an app, perhaps, or we have a forum or online, like people can chat about that to post information. Yeah, it will be practical. If we'll try.
So why does a union have to? How does it benefit the union to, for example, set up a Facebook group when you could just do that yourself and build a network on Facebook, or there could already be existing Facebook groups that help people find accommodation? What can the union bring to this equation?
Yes. Because the union has a lot of okay. If it's set up by individuals, the influence is not that big. People do not even know there is a Facebook group. If it's made by a union, and we can have other volunteers, students who want to do that job, because as I said, experience, like an intern, they want to manage that. I think it's also a good way. Yeah.
So you think the USU should have more internship positions?
Yeah, because some students, they are longing for any kind of experience, but I know them, and even like many companies say no to them. And if they can do voluntary jobs for the USU, it's good. Why not?
I think that's about all we had. So we'll probably leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.